We are going to explore a kind of distortion that occurs when you're drawing and gesturing with a pen tablet. I think this distortion is affecting a lot of you out there, and you may not even know about it. I'll explain what the distortion is, how common it might be, what it really looks like, and what you can do about it. The point of all of this is to give you the most pleasant drawing experience possible. Let's start with some basic background information. Visually, the distortion is easy to understand. If you are using a pen tablet, it's likely that even though you trace out a perfect circle on the pen tablet, it will show up like an oval on your display. Before we go too far, it's important to know that this distortion can only occur with pen tablets. Pen displays and pen computers are unaffected. The reason for this will be clear very soon. The active area is the region on the graphics tablet that is responsive to the EMR pen. In other words, it's the region on the tablet where you draw. EMR stands for electromagnetic resonance. It's the fundamental technology that powers graphics tablets. If you want to learn more about EMR technology, see the video description. There's a link to a video I created recently which explains the EMR technology in depth. A pen tablet does not have an embedded display, so its active area must be mapped to a display that is connected to your computer. Mapping is the process of taking a position on the tablet's active area, then finding the equivalent position on the display. The mapping can be applied to one display or multiple displays. However, for the purpose of this video, our focus will be the specific case where there's a pen tablet that is mapped to exactly one display. For any rectangle, the relationship between the width and the height is called the aspect ratio. When we talk about aspect ratios, sometimes we talk about the ratio with two numbers. So for example, 16:9. Other times, it's more convenient to talk about aspect ratios with a single number. So we divide the width by the height and use that number. For example, 16 divided by 9 is 1.78. In this video, we'll talk about aspect ratios using both formats. The central issue that causes the distortion I mentioned is that there are two aspect ratios involved. One aspect ratio comes from the active area of the pen tablet. The other aspect ratio comes from the display. If both the aspect ratios match, then drawing a circle on the active area of the tablet will give you a circle on the display. But if the aspect ratios don't match, for example, if the tablet is 16:10 and the display is 16:9, you will get some distortion. This means that drawing a circle on the pen tablet will result in an oval being drawn on the display. I mentioned earlier that this distortion only happens with pen tablets and not with pen displays and pen computers. Let's understand why. The reason is simple. Pen displays and pen computers come with an embedded display. The size and dimensions of this embedded display exactly match the active area of pen displays and pen computers. Therefore, their aspect ratios match. Therefore, there will be no distortion. Now that you understand the basics of the distortion and what causes it, let's explore this topic a little more deeply. First, how likely is it that you are using hardware that will give you this distortion? Second, how much distortion will you actually see? And third, how do you fix the distortion? Let's begin by considering how often this situation occurs, where there are mismatched aspect ratios. I looked at two sources of data. The first is statcounter.com. I pulled the desktop screen resolutions data from February 2021 to February 2022. The second dataset comes from information I collected from 48 different pen tablet models that are currently in the market or being used. Let's take a look at the data around the aspect ratio of displays first. The 16:9 and 16:10 aspect ratios account for 74.9% of all the resolutions that were seen. The 16:9 resolutions are highlighted in yellow, and the 16:10 resolutions are highlighted in orange. And if you look at the remaining ratios, I think it's likely you're not using them with pen tablets. Now let's take a look at the data we have for pen tablet models. Pen tablets with an aspect ratio of 16:9 or 16:10 account for 77.1% of all the pen tablet models I found. Because 16:9 and 16:10 are popular for both displays and pen tablets, for the rest of this video, I'm just going to focus on those two aspect ratios. So far, everything is looking great because both of these numbers are around 75%. But let's dive in a little deeper. Let's consider the 16:9 aspect ratio first. This aspect ratio accounts for about 64.1% of the display resolutions. However, only about 8% of pen tablet models have a 16:9 aspect ratio. Now let's take a look at the 16:10 aspect ratio. Only about 10.8% of the display resolutions were 16:10. However, 68.8% of the pen tablet models had a 16:10 aspect ratio. Now this is far from conclusive data, but I think it is a very big clue. There seems to be a mismatch between the displays you are using and the pen tablets you are using in terms of aspect ratios. Wacom is so important in this industry. Let's look at their pen tablet models in detail. This data covers a number of Wacom Intuos models. Although it does not cover every Intuos ever made, it does cover a large number of them. And it covers models all the way from the newest ones to ones that were made about 10 years ago. For those tablets with a 16:10 aspect ratio, 1.6, I've highlighted the rows in yellow. As you can see, the majority of their Intuos tablets are 16:10. The remaining two Wacom tablet models shown here are in the range of 1.4 to 1.5. And finally, the most important thing to notice here, none of these tablets are 16:9, not even close. I did find some tablets that have a 16:9 aspect ratio. I found exactly 4 of them. The Sense Labs tablet comes the closest to the correct mathematical value of 16:9, which is 1 followed by a bunch of 7s. So my takeaway from all of this is that it is very likely that you are using a pen tablet and a display and they have mismatched aspect ratios. Also, the most likely case is that the pen tablet is a 16:10 aspect ratio and the display has a 16:9 aspect ratio. With those specific aspect ratios, drawing a circle on the pen tablet will translate into exactly this kind of oval on the display. And it is my belief that most people do not go into their pen tablet drivers and change how their active area mapping works. So ultimately, I feel it's pretty likely that many of you who use pen tablets are drawing and you're drawing with some distortion. It's fine to talk about numbers, but now let's explore what you will actually see when you're drawing. This was the diagram I showed previously. It demonstrates the kinds of distortion you should see with a 16:10 aspect ratio tablet and a 16:9 aspect ratio display. Now I drew this picture using some basic math, and I believe it is accurate. But instead of relying on my math skills, let's just try out several tablets and see what really happens. Let's start with a display. That's 16:9. Again, that's 1.78. And then we'll compare against 3 tablets. Because I do have these 3 tablets available, and Wacom is so dominant in the industry, I'll use Wacom Intuos tablets for this comparison. Each tablet has a different aspect ratio. The Wacom Intuos 5 Small has an aspect ratio of 1.59. That's really close to the 16:10 aspect ratio, which is 1.6. I stress this point because that's the specific case I mentioned earlier that many people should be encountering. So here's what I did. First, I launched Clip Studio Paint. And then on the pen tablet, I put a circular guide to help me trace out a perfect circle. And then I traced out 2 circles for each tablet. For each trace of the circle, I applied different settings for the pen tablet. I traced once using red, and for that trace, I used the default tablet settings where the entire active area of the pen tablet is mapped to the display. This is the case that will produce distortion when the aspect ratios aren't matched between the pen tablet and the display. And then I traced out a black circle. This time I forced the pen tablet to use the same aspect ratio as the display, so there should be no distortion. And in all 3 cases you can see, the black circle is a perfect circle, and this is exactly what I expected. As you can see, the red circles distort exactly as we would expect. The more the pen tablet's aspect ratio diverges from 1.78, the greater the distortion of the red circles. Those Wacom pen tablets we looked at earlier all had a 16:10 aspect ratio, 1.6. The tablet I tested, which was the Wacom Intuos 5 Small, had an aspect ratio of 1.59, which is very close to 1.6. So if you have any of those Wacom models, the far right example is what you can expect in terms of distortion. Now, I don't recommend people use small tablets. I recommend they get medium-sized tablets. That's represented by the middle case. That's the Wacom Intuos Pro Medium. It has an aspect ratio of 1.514, so you can see the increased distortion. I use a Wacom Intuos Pro Large, and that has an aspect ratio of 1.44, which has a significant amount of distortion. And again, the point of all of this is to show you the actual real-world experience that you might get with a pen tablet and a display. We saw earlier that most pen tablet models have an aspect ratio of 16:10, or 1.6. So most of you should experience the distortion that's represented by the rightmost circles. Only you can say whether this kind of distortion is going to bother you. In my case, when I changed my tablet settings to avoid this distortion, drawing felt much better for me. Now that we've talked about the kind of distortion that you might experience, how do we fix it? Well, the good news is, it's easy. Let's take a look at how it works with Wacom. In the Wacom Tablet Properties application, first select the pen, then Mapping, and then you'll see a checkbox that says Force Proportions. The default value for force proportions is unchecked. An unchecked means you will get a distorted drawing if you have a mismatched aspect ratio between your pen tablet and your display, which you probably do. If you check this box, then the distortion will go away. Of course, there is a price you must pay to fix this distortion. To make the aspect ratios match, once you click this checkbox, some portion of the active area will no longer be used. I mean, after all, you did pay for all of that active area, and it feels a little bad that you're not using it all. But honestly, for myself, and I think this will apply to many of you, you're going to enjoy the experience so much better when there's no distortion that it's worth losing a little bit of active area. Of course, I've been showing this user interface for the Wacom line of pen tablets. Fortunately, other manufacturers have equivalent settings. The challenge here is that the other manufacturers don't use the same terminology when they're talking about the same thing. For example, what Wacom calls force proportions in their user experience, Huion calls it something completely different. There, it's called screen ratio. Here you can see how to get to it in your Huion tablet UI. You click on Pen Tablet, then Working Area, and then on the bottom left there's a drop-down with several choices. Full Area, which is the default, Custom Area, and then Screen Ratio. The Screen Ratio setting is exactly the same as the Wacom Force Proportion setting. Other tablets use their own terminology, so you'll have to look through their documentation to see where to change it and which setting to use. Whenever I make these videos, I like to share my own experience. Because even though I do make recommendations, the way I use pen tablets and pen displays might be different from that because I have very specific needs. So for many, many years now, I've used multiple displays. Most of that time, I've been using 2 displays, and I've been mapping my pen tablet's active area to expand across both displays. And of course, that means for all that time, I've been drawing in a very, very distorted manner. Occasionally, I would change the settings so that the pen display would use the same aspect ratio as the 2 displays combined. But you know, I always felt bad about losing all that active area. So that's the way it was for me for a long time, but recently something changed. Recently, I decided to get back into doing more illustrative type art, and I wanted to optimize my setup for that. First, I switched from using a medium-sized tablet to a large-sized tablet, a Wacom Intuos Pro Large. And then, because I wanted the best possible drawing experience, I mapped the tablet to use only one display and not both. And then I turned on force proportions. So even though I'm using my pen tablet with only one of my displays, and I've lost a little bit of active area because I'm using force proportions, I think overall it was worth it. It was a great trade-off. I have a great, fantastic drawing experience. So to recap, we've talked about the general problem of drawing distortion with pen tablets. We explored the chances that you might be experiencing this problem, and we've shed some light on how this problem would really manifest for you as you are drawing. And finally, I shared my own experience. Before we end this video, I want you to try something. Even if you're completely happy with the way your pen tablet is mapped to your display, try changing the setting. Try try forcing it so that your pen tablet is using the same aspect ratio as your display, and try that out for a week. At the end of that week, yes, I think some of you will say that you didn't really notice a big difference or it was not worth the change. But I am certain that some of you, especially those of you who do a lot of drawing, some of you will think that it feels so much more natural to draw without this distortion. I love creating these videos, and I want to thank you for watching them. I hope you found this one useful.